Institute by her family. She was 26 and suffered severe depression. Cameron began treating her with what he called depatterning. She was kept asleep for 20 out of 24 hours.
With the depatterning process, the person would descend in their memory further and further back. They'd go back in time to before they got sick. That was the important thing, it seemed to be, before they got sick.
And then having depatterned somebody or brought them down to where basically nothing but the essential functions of the body were going on in terms of breathing and things of this nature, that then he would begin to feed material into these individuals, positive material, such that the brain would be programmed in a positive way, so that the individual would be completely altered.
Then he put these tapes under our pillows called psychic driving. He would then put back into this empty brain a program of whatever sort he decided upon, and the people like myself would wake up another person, I guess.
Suddenly, while you're asleep, they'll absorb your minds, your memories, and you're reborn into an untroubled world.
Where everyone's the same?
Exactly.
What a world. We're not the last humans left. They'll destroy you.
Tomorrow you won't want them to. Tomorrow you'll be one of us.
I don't want any part of it.
You're forgetting something, Miles.
What's that?
You have no choice.
When I was discharged from the Allen Memorial, I felt like an alien from another world, visiting this world. I didn't fit. I was watching myself cooking, taking care of the children, doing the washing, but I knew I was different, and I didn't know how to become like everybody else. And it was a very lonely, scary place to be. People told me they were my children, but that didn't mean anything to me, so they were little people. They had names, and they smiled, and they went to school.
You really have no memory of them?
No, none whatsoever. Or of their father, whom I had married when I was 18, and I'd known for most of my life. It was, this is your husband. What's husband? What's making love?
You are hearing electrical impulses from artificial neurons, an attempt to duplicate the behavior of living nerves with electronic parts. This is how the higher nervous system, a man's brain, might work as a machine.
Cameron's experiments were extraordinary in their ambition, but they were not the work of a maverick. He was part of a new scientific way of thinking about the human mind that grew up in the 1950s. The brain, scientists believed, was like a computer, and memory was information.
The image of the mind became dominant was essentially a very fast and a very clever computer, such that memory was information that you had inscribed in specific places where you were then accessible for retrieval, and you could get rid of them, add them, and in many ways history was being regarded in the same way. I mean, in the Soviet state, for example, you airbrushed memory, and that was it, and was no longer in the picture.
In the 1950s, a new science of the mind grew up in America's universities. It was called cognitive science, and it linked psychology, psychiatry, and neuroscience. The image of the brain was that of a computer. It was an image that fitted perfectly with the political needs of those who were running the Cold War.
The image of the human being that was being built up at that particular time was that there was a great deal of vulnerability in every human being, and that vulnerability could be manipulated to program somebody to be something that I wanted them to be, and they didn't want to be. That you could manipulate people in such a way that they could be automatons, if you will, for whatever your own purposes were. This was the image that people thought was possible.
Yeah. I just feel like I don't have any thoughts like a human being. I'm just an animal walking around on the earth.
In some experiments, the behavior of mentally ill patients was directly altered by wires planted inside the brain.
Anything would go off somewhere and not never see nobody else.
Now the treatment is started. She's receiving a very minute amount of current. Actually, it amounts to only 5/1000ths of an ampere delivered to a very specific region in the brain. And, of course, it's changing in behavior.
And look at that smile you got now.
Why does that make me do that? I don't like to do that.
You really told me off, remember? Hmm?
I know I did, but I couldn't help it.
The CIA was deeply involved in the growth of cognitive science. Dr. Cameron was only one of many scientists whose work was funded by the agency in the 50s.
The CIA tended to be involved with those scientists and researchers who were on the frontiers of brain research. And they tended to choose them as young scientists and support them and subsidize them so their work would continue in the areas that the CIA found interesting. You've got to understand that it wasn't just one or two individuals, but that the CIA funded perhaps 15 or 20 key people right across the fields of psychology and brain research. So one can make a real case that the CIA played a catalytic role in the development of psychology as we know it today and as it was born in the 1950s and early 1960s.
Who were the psychologists who did agree to help you?
Well, some of them don't want to be identified, so I won't really answer that question for you.
Why do they not want their names mentioned?
Because they like to deny they ever had anything to do with the Central Intelligence Agency. After we got our bad name and became a rogue tiger and the peace movements and everything that came in terms of that began to bloody the nose of CIA. And certainly many of the professors in the universities and in the various laboratories in terms of that, it was embarrassing for them to have to admit that they worked for CIA. Now, that's a fact. I shouldn't have said that, but that's a fact.
But back in those days, they were happy to work for you.
Very, very much so, and very interested.
It wasn't only human beings who became involved with the experiments. Animals, too, were programmed to fight the Cold War. One project was codenamed Acoustic Kitty.
The idea behind Acoustic Kitty was to develop an audio device that could function despite extraneous noises. The cat that was used for the experiment had to be cut open and have a power pack placed inside its abdomen. Wires were run up to its ear, to its cochlea, wires to its brain to determine when it was hungry or sexually aroused, and wires to override these urges. The cat was then put on a test, sent across the street to eavesdrop on a conversation, being monitored by a van loaded with equipment. And as this poor little monstrosity waddled across the street, a taxi cab came down and ran it over. So it was $25 million down the drain. $25 million was a lot of money then.
Moscow is in the midst of the last hours of summer.
Then suddenly, the Soviet threat came much closer to America. In 1960, the new president of Cuba, Fidel Castro, announced a formal alliance with the Soviet Union. America was in the midst of a presidential election, and Cuba became one of the central issues.
Cuba has been lost for the time being to the communists. And I want Mr. Khrushchev and anyone else to understand that if the Democratic Party wins this election, he will confront in the 1960s and America